The young king from Macedon forced the great cities of Hellas, as Greeks called their homeland, into submission. This wasn't because he disliked them. In fact, he longed to be accepted as the greatest among them. He was Alexander the Great, and like every other boy in ancient Greece, he knew Homer's Iliad by heart. The story of the legendary Trojan War is presented as an epic clash between heroes and kings from a bygone era of Mycenaean Greece. Everyone knew of Achilles and Hector, Paris and Agamemnon. Their honorable and brave deeds embodied Greekness, and Alexander throughout his entire life saw himself as the new Achilles. But our story begins long before the age of heroes. The world began with the generation of four protogenoi, the primordial gods. First there was chaos, a rude and undeveloped mass made of all discordant elements confused. Then came Gaia, the earth, the ever-firm foundation of all. After Gaia came Tartarus, dim in the underground depths, and next Eros, the god of love, who makes men's bodies go limp. From Gaia came Uranus, the sky, Aurea, the mountains, and Pontus, the sea. Uranus had 18 children with Gaia, the 3 Centimanes each with 50 heads and 100 arms, the 3 Cyclopes, and the 12 Titans. He despised his children and banished them deep inside earth. Furious, Gaia made a sickle for Cronus, the youngest of the Titans. He ambushed Uranus and freed his brethren, thus becoming the supreme leader of the cosmos. Cronus learned that he would be overthrown by one of his children, so logically he swallowed them as soon as they were born, namely Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. When his wife Rhea had her 6th and final child, Zeus, she hid him on Crete, giving Cronus a rock to swallow instead. When Zeus grew up, he forced Cronus to disgorge his siblings. He also released the Cyclopes, who forged him his greatest weapon, the thunderbolt. A great conflict erupted between the old gods and the new ones led by Zeus. It was known as the War of the Titans or Titanomachy, and raged on for 10 years. In the end, Zeus defeated the Titans and threw them into Tartarus. The fate of his father haunted Zeus, so he decided to swallow Metis, his first wife. But she was already pregnant with Athena, the goddess of wisdom, civilization, and justice, and she burst from his head, fully grown and clad for war. One of the Titans, Prometheus, didn't fight against Zeus and was spared imprisonment. He was then given the task of creating man. Prometheus shaped man out of mud, and Athena breathed life into the clay figures. Prometheus then defied the gods by giving humans fire, representing technology, knowledge, and more broadly, civilization itself. Or at least that's what the Greeks believed. Greek civilization was defined by geography more than anything else. Greece is located on the southern tip of the Balkan Peninsula, including islands in the Ionian and the Aegean Seas, the largest of which are Crete, Euboea, and Rhodes. The mainland has many peninsulas of its own, the most prominent being Peloponnese in the south, Attica in the east, and Chalkidiki in the north. Most of Greece is dominated by large mountains. The Pindus mountain range is colloquially known as the spine of Greece, as it separates the country into western and eastern halves. The Olympus mountain range in the north separates Thessaly from Macedonia and hosts the highest peak in Greece, Mount Olympus, home of the gods. These mountains used to be covered in forests of pine, cypress, and cedar, providing excellent timber for shipbuilding. These ships were the main medium of transport and trade, as roads were difficult to build in such rocky terrain. Limited sources of metal ore and fine marble were scattered throughout Greek territory, making some areas considerably wealthier than others. Notably, the silver mines in Attica fueled the Athenian Golden Age during the 5th century BC. Only a small proportion of the land was suitable for agriculture, mostly in Thessaly, Macedonia, and in the plains along the coast. The staples of the Greek diet were cereals, wine, and olive oil, which were also valuable trade goods. This mountainous terrain divided the population into many smaller regions, isolated from each other. Even though the Greeks shared a common cultural identity and spoke the same language, this territorial separation prevented them from ever forming a united nation. They developed their own dialect, cultural aspects, and separate identities, leading to the rise of numerous city-states. The Greeks were preceded by several Bronze Age cultures that inhabited the Aegean. Most notable of these were the Minoans on Crete, who developed the first advanced European civilization. Starting around 3100 BCE, the Minoans developed bronze working, marking the end of the Late Stone Age and the start of the Early Bronze Age. The Minoans get their name from the mythical king Minos, who built a labyrinth to house the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature. King Minos and the Minotaur feature heavily in Greek mythology. The Minoans are famous for their maze-like palaces that served as political and cultural centers. With the rise of palaces came the need for bureaucracy, and the Minoans developed a logo-syllabic writing system known as Linear A. Linear A is written in an unknown language and is yet to be deciphered. The Minoans were skilled seafarers, and they frequently traded with Egyptians and Syrians, exchanging not only goods but also ideas and technologies. While the Minoans were thriving, protected by their strong navy, around 2300 BCE, a wave of destruction washed over the Hellenic culture of mainland Greece. This destruction was accompanied by a large migration of people, the Proto-Greeks, onto the peninsula. These new inhabitants would take some 600 years to catch up to the destroyed Hellenic culture, but around the 17th century BC, the first signs of a complex society can be found in the archaeological record. This was the Mycenaean civilization, named after the ruined city of Mycenae. This city is known for its large grave circles and massive cyclopean walls. There isn't much archaeological evidence on the Mycenaeans. What little information we do have comes mostly from numerous graves dotted across Greece. Gradual increases in quality and number of items found in these graves point towards a slow but steady increase in the wealth and power of the ruling elites. Large amounts of weapons buried alongside the men tell us that the Mycenaeans were a warlike people. Similar items were found in faraway burial sites, many of which originated outside of Europe. This is clear evidence that the Mycenaeans were trading among themselves, but also participated in the lucrative Mediterranean trade, most likely through the Minoans. For centuries, the Minoans were the dominant power in the Aegean, but suddenly, around 1450 BC, a second wave of destruction washed over the area, this time hitting the Minoans on Crete. In centuries prior, several large-scale natural disasters hit Crete, including earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tidal waves. The Minoans not only survived all these disasters, but thrived in their aftermath. This final disaster was of a different nature. All but one palace complex was left in ruin, as well as many towns and country villas. In Knossos, the last standing palace, tablet with a new script, named Linear B, appeared. The historians were shocked to learn that Linear B was actually the first instance of written Greek language. From this, they concluded two things. Firstly, that the Mycenaeans are Greeks, and secondly, that the Minoans experienced a violent reversal of fortune at the hands of the Mycenaeans. Following the conquest of Crete, the Mycenaeans entered into the pinnacle of their civilization. They adopted the palace system from the Minoans. The warrior graves across Greece were richer than ever, evidence of the latest military technology. The war chariots started appearing on grave markers. The Mycenaeans spread across the islands in the Aegean and even to the shores of Anatolia. During these times, the civilizations of the eastern Mediterranean thrived, but this prosperity hung by a narrow thread. The backbone of Bronze Age economics was trade. Tin, a crucial metal for manufacturing bronze, was a rare sight in the Mediterranean. There is evidence of tin arriving in the Mediterranean all the way from the British Isles. Professional armies of all major civilizations relied heavily on war chariots. These were expensive and extremely hard to replace. This meant that any prolonged conflict could be disastrous for the empires of the late Bronze Age. All it took was for the first domino to fall around 1200 BC, and the major civilizations of the eastern Mediterranean collapsed, one after another. The Mycenaeans and Hittites were destroyed, while the Egyptians and the Assyrians limped along in a weakened state. This period is known as the Late Bronze Age collapse and is highly debated. The main reason for the collapse of the entire region is still unknown, but some historians connect it to a large volcanic eruption in Iceland. This eruption would cause sudden climate change and widespread famine across the known world. Populations from the northern Mediterranean started moving south in search of food, but they encountered regions riddled with internal strife. These invaders are known as the Sea Peoples, and they would deal the final blow to an already weakened region. We should now return to Greece and the fall of the Mycenaean civilization. The destruction of Troy, as told in the epic poem Iliad, is dated to around 1200 BC, roughly coinciding with the Late Bronze Age collapse. Perhaps it was the failed Greek expedition to Troy that kicked off the first bout of upheaval in Greece. In classical Greek fashion, the Mycenaeans were not united. Internal strife between rival rulers caused widespread and continuous destruction throughout Greece. This resulted in the destruction of palaces essential for these early Greek settlements, causing a general collapse of the Mycenaean society. With the destruction of palaces, there was no more need for bureaucracy, and literacy was lost in this part of the world. With this, the Greeks entered a period known as the Greek Dark Ages. The second migration of the Greeks to the south, known as the Dorian invasion, was used by the Greek authors to explain the turmoil of this period. But actually, Dorians came to southern Greece in small groups over a longer period of time. Around 950 BC, they founded their greatest city, Sparta. At the start of the Dark Ages, there was a sharp population decline, lasting all the way to 1050 BC, when the population reached its lowest point in 1,000 years. During this period, settlements in Greece were not numerous, and barring a few exceptions, they were sparsely populated. These cities were ruled by chieftains who didn't hold absolute control. They had to get approval from the assembly, laying the groundwork for the future development of democracy. Although the region was experiencing a violent upheaval, the lives of ordinary farmers stayed pretty much the same. Greek remained the dominant language of the region, and the poets told stories of bygone kings. One change that did impact the lives of ordinary people across the Mediterranean was the introduction of ironworking. The creation of the first iron weapons roughly coincides with the late Bronze Age collapse. These weapons were harder and kept their edge better than their bronze counterparts. Although iron ore is a very abundant material with sources all across the known world, higher temperatures were needed to smelt it, making it practically unusable for the Bronze Age civilizations. Now that trade over the Mediterranean was at a low point, copper and tin were hard to come by and the age of bronze was at an end. New tools and weapons made of iron marked the start of the early Iron Age in the Mediterranean. By 950 BC, all weapons found in Greek graves were fashioned from iron. Starting at around 1050 BC, Greeks tell of another migration, this time Ionian. But just like with the previous Dorian invasion, this was not a mass migration of people. A small number of traders from Athens and Euboea started reviving old Mycenaean settlements in the Aegean, eventually reaching the shores of Anatolia. At approximately the same time, Aeolians from Thessaly started doing the same, while Dorians were late to the party, beginning only around 900 BC. The Aegean Sea was now firmly under Greek control. Increased contact with the Phoenician traders reintroduced the Greeks to the art of writing. In the late 9th or early 8th century BC, the Greeks adopted the Phoenician writing system by adding signs for vowel sounds, creating the Greek alphabet. The epic poems, passed down orally from the time of the collapse, could now finally be recorded. In the late 8th or early 7th century BC, the blind poet Homer wrote down the famous epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's unclear if Homer even existed, but one thing is for sure, these epics are some of the most influential works of not only Greek, but world literature. Famously, during his conquest of Persia, Alexander the Great had a copy of the Iliad on his nightstand. With these poems, Homer ushered in a new age of prosperity, known as Archaic Greece. Starting in the 8th century BCE, there was a sharp increase of population across Greece. With this came a greater need for food, further dividing the rich landowners and the poor masses. Landless citizens, seeing no hope of improving their prospects at home, started venturing out in search of new lands. These settlers found colonies from Iberia to the Black Sea. Some of these colonies would in time become great powers in their own right. Enterprising Greek merchants, in search of new riches, started trading with their kinsmen, expanding the trade routes across the whole Mediterranean. The Greek colonists eventually came into conflict with the growing power of Carthage, and they switched focus from the Western Mediterranean to the Black Sea. Although the Greeks were now spread across the known world, they still shared a common identity. Numerous religious festivals and shrines sprang across Greece, accepting worshippers from all around the Greek world. This gave rise to the idea of Pan-Hellenism, or unity of all Greeks. The most important of these festivals was held in honor of Zeus in Olympia. In 776 BC, the first Olympic Games were held during this festival. The Greeks would go on to hold the games continuously every 4 years for almost 1200 years. With the large population increase came new political developments. The separated Greek communities united into self-governing political units known as city-states. A city-state, or polis as it is known in Greek, comprises a capital city and the surrounding area. Some city-states were as small as a town and few villages, while others controlled a large territory. For example, Athens controlled the whole of Attica, and all inhabitants of the peninsula were known as Athenians. The main parts for the development of the polis, namely the assembly of fighting-age men and the council of elders, were already in place during the Dark Ages. The only thing left was to formally unite the communities into a cohesive unit. The polis remained the main form of political organization until the Roman conquest of Greece. All chieftains who held power from the late Bronze Age united into a powerful aristocracy that ruled the polis. This state of affairs wouldn't last for long, as the disenfranchised citizens slowly but surely gained the upper hand. During these times, the Greek military had a renaissance of its own. The hoplite emerged as a central military unit. Hoplites were heavily armored soldiers who carried heavy spears in one hand and large bronze shields in the other. When fighting, they were densely packed in lines, shoulder to shoulder. This formation was known as the phalanx, and it would stay in use until the Roman conquest. Phalanx was hard to maneuver, making it extremely vulnerable to attacks from the rear. Fortunately, the mountainous terrain of Greece offered little opportunity for complicated maneuvers. The two opposing phalanxes would usually meet on an open field and fight head-on, with a stronger and better trained army usually prevailing. In the phalanx, all men, from the richest aristocrat to the poorest farmer who could afford gear, were equal. It was this apparent equality in the face of danger that eroded the hereditary power of the aristocracy and paved the way for democratic rule. Sometimes, on the other hand, the hoplites were more inclined towards one man than to democracy. When this happened, that man would take control of the polis, ruling it with absolute authority. These men were called tyrants. A large proportion of city-states had a tyrant at one point or another, but their rule was usually short, lasting no more than a generation or two, after which the power reverted back to the people. During this time, two city-states rose above the others, Athens and Sparta. Sparta was located on the southern Peloponnese, and it was formed when 4 villages united into a single polis. Unlike other states that expanded their reach by colonization, the Spartans preferred to use force. In the second half of the 8th century, the Spartans conquered nearby Macedonia, subjugating the native Greek population. These Greeks were known as Helots, and they were in essence state-owned slaves. Helots vastly outnumbered the Spartans, creating a constant threat of an uprising. This led the Spartans to develop a strong warrior culture. Spartan boys were trained from birth to become the ultimate hoplites. Unlike other Greeks who had day jobs, the Spartans were solely focused on war, with all their needs for food and other goods provided by Helots. The Spartans outmatched other Greeks on the field, but their strict requirements for citizenship and stringent rules on day-to-day life eventually led to population decline and their ultimate downfall. Around 550 BCE, the Spartans formed a strong military alliance known as the Peloponnesian League. At first, Sparta had ultimate control over the league, but after a failed campaign in 506 against Athens, Sparta had to concede and a League Congress was formed. The power of the League made Sparta the de facto leader of the Greeks in the early 5th century BCE. Peloponnese was connected to mainland Greece by a narrow isthmus. On the other side of that isthmus stood Athens. Founded during the Mycenaean period, Athens is the only large city that escaped the destruction of the late Bronze Age collapse. By 700 BC, all inhabitants of Attica were united into a single polis, with the central government located in Athens. Domestic production of food couldn't keep up with the rapid population growth of the early Archaic period, and the Athenians had to increasingly rely on maritime imports. The increasing divide between the extremely wealthy and the extremely poor was in danger of boiling over. The Athenians prevented a civil war by appointing Solon in 594, who codified a new set of laws. Most importantly, he eliminated debt bondage, freeing a large part of the population. Athens he left behind was one of small free farmers. The laws of Solon would later influence the 12 tables of Roman law, setting the foundations for all Western legal tradition. Following Solon's departure, the tyrant Pisistratus seized control of Athens. Although the city prospered during his reign, his sons were not as apt for leadership, and they were eventually expelled with the help from Sparta. In their wake, a struggle for power between the aristocracy and the masses erupted. Finally, around 508 BCE, Cleisthenes, with the support from the assembly, introduced a set of reforms that are considered as the start of Athenian democracy. The population was divided into 10 tribes, and a new assembly, the Council of 500, was created. Membership in the council was determined by lot and lasted for a year. This finally brought stability to Athenian politics. During the Archaic period, a new discipline known as philosophy was beginning to develop across the Greek world. These early scholars were known as the pre-Socratic philosophers. They were mostly interested in cosmology, but also had a profound impact on many subjects such as mathematics, geometry, astronomy, biology, and medicine. They tried to find natural explanations for observed phenomena, instead of attributing them to the actions of the gods. Some of the pre-Socratic philosophers, like Thales of Miletus, Pythagoras, and Heraclitus, are well known even today. In the late 5th century Athens, Socrates began teaching about morale and ethics, marking the start of classical Greek philosophy. In these times, unbeknownst to the Greeks, a new power was rising in the east. Starting from the Iranian plateau in 550 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire, better known as the Persian Empire, grew to cover most of the known world. Stretching from the Indus Valley in the east all the way to Egypt and the Balkans in the west, the Persian Empire was the largest by this point in history. With the conquest of Anatolia, the Persians came into contact with the Greeks. The Persians set up tyrants to rule over the Greek settlements in Asia Minor, but they weren't too happy about this. In 499 BCE, one of these tyrants, Aristagoras of Miletus, directed Greek anger towards Darius the Great, sparking the Ionian Revolt. Although the Ionians had help from Athens and Eretria, by 493 Miletus and other rebelling cities were sacked, ending the revolt. Wanting to punish Greeks for their involvement in the Ionian Revolt, in 492 BC, Darius sent an expedition to mainland Greece. The Persians captured Thrace, Thassos, and Macedonia, but their fleet was destroyed in a storm and they had to retreat. In 490, Darius tried again, this time sending his force directly over the Aegean. After destroying Eretria, the Persians continued to Attica, landing near the stronghold of Marathon. The Athenians requested help from the Spartans, but they were in the midst of a religious festival and unable to assist. Standing alone, the Athenians decided to meet the Persians on the field. The hoplites caught the Persians off guard and after a grueling fight scored a major victory. According to Herodotus, only 192 Athenians died in the battle. In the aftermath of the first Persian invasion, the Council of 10 Generals, or strategoi as they were known, became the most important political office in Athens. Furthermore, the Athenians found rich silver mines in the south. Using the proceeds from these mines, they built a 200-strong trireme fleet. 10 years after Marathon, the Persians tried again. In 480 BC, the now king Xerxes marched with his army into Greece. They built a pontoon bridge across the Hellespont, and almost 100,000 troops crossed into Europe. Only a small number of city-states joined into an alliance known as the Hellenic League. Others stayed neutral, or like Thebes and Argos, joined the Persians. The Greek force under the command of a Spartan king Leonidas met the Persians at a narrow pass called Thermopylae. The hoplites could hold the narrow pass almost indefinitely, but they were betrayed and the Persians, learning of a secret mountain path, encircled the Greeks. With no hope of escape, the 300 Spartans, along with Thespians and the Theban loyalists, fought to the death. Athens was abandoned and the Persians burned it to the ground. The sacrifice at Thermopylae bought enough time for the Greek fleet to set a trap at Salamis, where they lured and sunk the much larger Persian fleet. Xerxes returned to Persia, but the next year he sent another army, under the leadership of Mardonius, into Greece. They were defeated at Plataea by the largest Greek force ever assembled, thus ending the Second Persian invasion. This victory marks the start of the Greek Classical Period and the Athenian Golden Age. In 477, the Athenians, along with other numerous city-states, formed the Delian League, an alliance designed to protect Greece from another Persian invasion. Predictably, the Athenians were the leaders of the league, with other members paying annual tribute in either ships or coins. The Greeks were now on the offensive and they expelled the Persians from Europe. After that, the Athenians started setting up new colonies across the Aegean. These colonies weren't independent, but rather a part of a growing Athenian empire. Any attempt to leave the Delian League was met by force from Athens, and it was increasingly clear that Athens, and not the League, was the master of the Aegean. Back at home, the Athenians were not united. Struggle between the aristocracy and the masses continued, until in 462 BCE, Ephialtes transferred most of the judicial power to the democratically elected offices, thus strengthening Athenian democracy. His assassination a year later opened the door for Pericles to take center stage. He would shape Athenian politics for the next 30 years. In 459, a dispute between Athens and Corinth sparked the first or undeclared Peloponnesian War. Early in the war, Athens achieved some limited success against both Sparta and Thebes. From there, fighting was sparse and not much changed. Until 445, when Euboea and Megara rebelled, and several states left the Delian League. Thebes pushed Athens back from Boeotia. This finally prompted Athens to sign a 30-year peace with Sparta. Unfortunately, this peace would be broken only 14 years later. In 433 BC, Athens allied with Corcyra, a colony of Corinth. Although the Athenians didn't break the treaty, they did step on the toes of Corinth. Athens helped Corcyra to defeat a large Peloponnesian fleet, and hopes of a lasting peace between the two leagues were waning. Another Corinthian colony, Potidea, was a member of the Delian League, but maintained strong ties with Corinth. When Athens demanded these ties be broken, they refused, and Athens besieged the city. The third and final blow to the treaty came when Athens expelled Megarian merchants from all ports of the league. This was one step too far, and the Peloponnesian League declared war on Athens in 431 BCE. Although the two sides tried to reconcile, the Thebans forced their hand by attacking Plataea. Following the outbreak of the war, Pericles ordered all inhabitants of Attica to abandon their homes and retreat to Athens. He knew that the Athenian army could not match the professional soldiers of Sparta. Instead, he would use the naval dominance of the Athenian Empire to harass the Peloponnese. The long wall connecting Athens and the port of Piraeus allowed the Athenians to ship in enough food and supplies as long as the war lasted. Spartan armies ravaged Attica, but couldn't do anything about the Athenian walls. The cramped conditions inside Athens created a perfect breeding ground for diseases, and in 429 BCE, an outbreak of the plague caused great devastation in the city. As many as 1 in 3 people died, including Pericles himself. The war continued with Sparta controlling the land and Athens the sea, with neither side able to strike a crushing blow. Due to these prolonged conflicts, strict citizenship policies in Sparta were beginning to impact their population. When 420 Spartan hoplites were stranded on the island near Pylos, the Spartans were willing to surrender in order to save their lives. A delegation was sent to Athens, but their advance was rejected and the war continued. The Athenians sent a flotilla to the island, and the 292 hoplites were captured, with the rest killed. With their position now strengthened, the Athenians decided to keep fighting rather than accept a peace treaty. This was a big mistake, as many historians believe that this peace could have dissolved the Peloponnesian League. It was now time for the momentum to swing back to the Spartan side. Supported by the Spartan troops, in 424 the Athenian allies in Chalcidice switched sides, bringing with them an important Athenian stronghold of Amphipolis. In 422 the Athenians sent an army to recover the city. They were repelled by the Spartans, and both generals died in the battle. Exhausted by the years of fighting, the two sides signed a peace treaty. Spartan allies, Corinth and Thebes, were highly dissatisfied with the treaty, even refusing to sign it. This wouldn't be a problem though, as the peace would stand for only 3 years. When peace between Argos and Sparta expired in 418 BCE, the Argives allied with Athens and the hostilities resumed. The Spartans scored an early victory against the alliance, and the Argives broke out their treaty with Athens. In 416, the Athenians sent a flotilla to the island of Melos, demanding that they join the Delian League. When Melos refused, the city was razed to the ground, the men killed, and the women and children sold into slavery. This incident tarnished the Athenian reputation for centuries to come. It was then that Segesta, a Sicilian city, requested help against Syracuse, a chief city in Sicily and a colony of Corinth. Despite some pushback, the Athenians sent a large expedition force to Sicily. The Spartans sent help to Syracuse, and this expedition proved disastrous for Athens. More than 10,000 hoplites, along with all other supporting troops, were either killed or captured. Upwards of 200 ships were lost in Sicily, and the Athenian naval empire came crumbling down. Although severely weakened, the Athenians were not yet defeated. It would take Sparta another 8 grueling years and even an alliance with Persia to finish the job. In this time, the fortune swung back and forth a couple more times, but in the end, in 404 BCE, the Spartans finally defeated the Athenians, dissolved the Delian League, and occupied Athens itself. Instead of destroying the city, as some of their allies proposed, the Spartans set up a council of Spartan-leaning oligarchs, known as the 30 Tyrants, as the new rulers of Athens. The 30 ruled for only 8 months, and in that short time they executed and exiled a great number of citizens. Thrasybulus, a well-respected general from the Peloponnesian War, led an uprising that opposed the 30, returning democracy back to Athens. In the aftermath of this tyranny, the Athenians wanted to prosecute all men responsible for their recent misfortunes. To prevent an all-out war between the classes, the Athenians agreed on amnesty for all crimes committed before 403. One man, however, didn't evade prosecution. The famous philosopher Socrates was charged with worshipping false gods and corrupting the youth. In actuality, his crimes were of a different nature. The leader of the 30 tyrants, Critias, was one of his pupils, and so was Alcibiades, an Athenian general who switched sides during the war. For his perceived misconduct, Socrates was given a death sentence. Following the war, the Spartans enjoyed a brief period of hegemony over Greece. Thebes and Corinth, still unhappy about the peace deal, decided to put a stop to this in 395. They allied with Athens and Persia and attacked Sparta, starting the Corinthian War. The alliance had early success on both land and sea, but when Persia switched their support to Sparta, the allies were defeated and had to sue for peace in 387 BCE. This time Sparta occupied Thebes, installing a pro-Spartan government in 382. But again Spartan control was short-lived, and in 379 Thebans took back control with the help from Athens. The two cities allied, forming a defensive confederation known as the Second Athenian League. The Thebans, under the leadership of Epaminondas, engaged the Spartans on the plains of Leuctra in 371 BC. Employing novel military tactics, the Thebans destroyed the Spartan army and with it the Spartan myth. For the first time in Greek history, a full-strength Spartan phalanx was outmatched by another Greek army. Out of the 700 Spartan citizens present on the field, 400 were killed. Following this victory, Thebes left the Second Athenian League. Sensing the Spartan weakness, Peloponnesian states revolted against their rule and the Arcadian League was formed. The Arcadians and the Thebans failed to take the city of Sparta, but they liberated the Helots in Messenia and disbanded the Peloponnesian League in 366 BC. Sparta would never recover from these defeats, continuing to exist only as a shadow of its former self. Spartan hegemony was destroyed, and it was now time for Thebes to take center stage in Greek politics. During this time, Epaminondas, along with his colleague Pelopidas, pursued an aggressive expansion policy. They waged wars in the north, conquering Thessaly and imprisoning the future king of Macedon, Philip II. These campaigns opened the door for their enemies in the south. Athens and Sparta, along with other states in the Peloponnese, united against Thebes. In the Battle of Mantinea in 362 BCE, the Thebans were victorious but lost their leader Epaminondas. Thebes, now leaderless, struggled to keep their hold as the hegemon of Greece. When Phocis, a rising power in central Greece, captured Delphi and used temple funds to hire a large mercenary army, Thebes had to look for outside help. The Athenians weren't in a much better position. In 357 BC, some Athenian allies, aided by the Persian governor Mausolus, rebelled, sparking the outbreak of the social war. The Athenians were defeated and the Second Athenian League disbanded, having lasted less than a single generation. The early 4th century is marked by frequent citizen uprisings throughout Greece. A growing divide between the very rich and the very poor led to rising tension between the classes. These tensions boiled over into violent uprisings more often than not. Centuries of constant infighting significantly weakened the Greek city-states. Once able to stop the full might of the Persian Empire, the Greeks were now no more than a nuisance in the Aegean. The animosity between the cities was rising with each consecutive battle, and the prospect of a pan-Hellenic alliance forming to stop an outside threat was slim. While all of this was happening, philosophy was still flourishing in the Greek world. Around 387, Plato founded the Academy in Athens. His most famous student, Aristotle, studied in the Academia for 20 years before leaving to open his own school, the Lyceum. Both schools would stay open continuously until they were destroyed by the Roman dictator Sulla in 86 BCE. While classical Greece was flourishing, a small kingdom was growing on the northern edge of the Greek world. Although considered barbarians by other Greeks, the Macedonians spoke a dialect of Doric Greek. Unlike their neighbors to the south, the Macedonians were ruled by kings. These kings had ultimate power, making them an easy target, and almost all of them met a violent end. In the late 6th century BCE, seeking protection from their neighbors, the Macedonians allied with the growing Persian Empire. Although they stayed loyal during the Persian invasion of Greece, the Macedonians were set free following the Persian defeat. The Macedonians now started expanding their influence toward the Aegean, coming into conflict with Athens. Frequent changes in leadership threatened to destabilize the kingdom, and when King Perdiccas III died while fighting Illyrians in 360 BCE, Macedonia was on the verge of collapse. In these troubled times, Philip II was crowned the King of Macedon. During his exile in Thebes, he gained valuable knowledge of Greek politics and the military. He immediately put this knowledge to good use by neutralizing the Thracians and Athenians through diplomacy and defeating the Illyrians and Paeonians in battle. Philip married the Molossian princess Olympias, thus securing an alliance with Epirus. In 356 they had a son whom they named Alexander. Upon taking the throne, Philip took to reorganizing the Macedonian state, and more importantly the army. Lessons learned from the Theban general Epaminondas came in handy now. The old Macedonian militia was transformed into a well-trained hoplite phalanx with one notable difference. A short Greek spear was replaced by a 6-meter-long sarissa. This allowed the men from the back rows to also attack the enemy, creating a virtually unbreakable wall of spears. With these reforms, Macedonia was transformed into a dominant military power in the eastern Mediterranean. The Macedonian phalanx would go on to rule this part of the world until the arrival of the Roman legions. When Thebes found itself in danger from Phocis, they invited Philip to intervene. In 353 BCE, he successfully crushed Phocis and their ally Pherae, an old Macedonian rival. He occupied Pherae, and Thessaly joined the growing Macedonian kingdom. The power of Phocis was dismantled, and Philip secured control over the region. The doors were now open for Philip to invade Attica, but before he could march south, he first had to deal with his former allies. In 349 BCE, the Chalcidian League tried to switch sides and ally with Athens. The following year, Philip captured and destroyed the chief city Olynthus, thus putting an end to the League. The writing was now on the walls, and the Athenians realized they couldn't fight the rising might of Macedonia. They agreed to a peace treaty, effectively becoming a Macedonian vassal. The south now secured, Philip could focus on conquest of Thrace. During this campaign, the Athenians, unhappy with their position, started making trouble, and Philip declared war on them. In 338 BC, Philip met a large coalition of Greeks, led by Athens and Thebes, in the Battle of Chaeronea. Philip's son Alexander, commanding the Campanian cavalry, won the day. With this decisive victory, all resistance in Greece was destroyed, and the period of Macedonian hegemony had started. The next year, Philip summoned a general assembly in Corinth. At this meeting, all Greek states, with the exception of Sparta, recognized Philip as the new hegemon of Greece, thus forming the Corinthian League. The League finally brought an end to the constant squabbles between the city-states. The other thing discussed at this meeting was Philip's ultimate goal, the invasion of Persia. During the 330s, Persia was rocked with internal strife and couldn't put a check on Macedonian expansion. In 336 BC, Philip sent a preliminary force into Anatolia to incite rebellion among the Greek subjects. But as fate would have it, Philip wouldn't live long enough to see his grand plan in motion. During his daughter's wedding, Philip was killed by one of his own bodyguards. The assassination was the culmination of a political crisis that erupted when Philip married his seventh wife, a Macedonian noblewoman, Cleopatra. After his father's death, Alexander had to act quickly to secure the throne of Macedonia. Although he was named Philip's heir and groomed to rule from a young age, his ascension to the throne was not at all assured. During the aforementioned crisis, Alexander and his mother Olympias had to flee Macedon. He only returned when Cleopatra gave birth to a girl. Antipater, a senior officer in the army, quickly presented Alexander to the troops, who crowned him king. He took the throne as Alexander III, but he is better known as Alexander the Great. He was 20 years old at the time. On his mother's side, Alexander claims descent from the mythical hero Achilles, while on his father's side he claims descent from the demigod Heracles. Alexander would spend his entire life trying to live up to these legendary ancestors. Alexander first eliminated all potential rivals to the throne. Some Greeks tried to exploit this upheaval and win back their independence, but Alexander quickly marched south and affirmed his position as the hegemon of the Corinthian League. In 335, he launched quick campaigns into Thrace and Illyria, showing that Macedonian dominance was as present as ever. During these campaigns, a rumor spread that Alexander was killed and Thebes revolted. Unfortunately for the Thebans, he was still very much alive. He razed Thebes and sold the population into slavery. With all threats from within and without the kingdom subdued, Alexander was ready for his long-awaited invasion of Persia. In the spring of 334, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with 37,000 troops. The Macedonian treasury was running low, and Alexander was in need of a quick victory. The Persian governors, known as satraps, gave him the opportunity when they tried to stop his advance in the Battle of Granicus. Although Alexander was almost killed in the fighting, his forces came out on top and the Persian army was destroyed. Ancient sources claim that only 115 Macedonian troops perished, compared to 5,000 or 6,000 Persians. After the battle, Alexander sent 300 suits of Persian armor to Athens with an inscription: "Alexander, son of Philip, and all the Greeks except the Spartans, present this offering." With this victory, Persian resistance in Anatolia was crushed and Alexander secured a foothold in Asia. King of Kings Darius III now marched with his entire host, approximately 100,000 strong, to stop Alexander. The two kings met in 333 in the Battle of Issus. The battle was a spectacular Macedonian victory, so much so that Darius abandoned his men and fled back home. When the Persians realized their king was gone, they fell into a panic rout and many were slain. After the battle, Alexander captured both Darius' family and treasure, putting an end to his financial woes. Alexander could now continue his march towards Egypt unopposed. Most cities offered no resistance, and those that did, namely Tyre and Gaza, were leveled to the ground. Alexander entered Egypt, not as a conqueror but as a liberator. The Egyptians were repressed under Persian rule, but Alexander made sure to honor their gods and traditions, thus winning over the populace. Alexander visited the oracle of Zeus Ammon, who greeted him as the son of Ammon, further strengthening his belief that he was more than a mere mortal. While in Egypt, Alexander founded a city that will bear his name even today, Alexandria. Egypt was now secured, and Alexander was ready to go after Darius III. Darius tried to surrender, offering Alexander large amounts of gold and vast swaths of territory. Although his advisors urged him to accept, Alexander refused and marched his armies into the Persian heartland. In 331, Darius assembled a new army and met Alexander for the last time in the Battle of Gaugamela. The battle was another great Macedonian victory, and Darius again fled from the field. The army hailed Alexander as the king of Asia. All resistance in Persia was now broken, and Alexander marched victoriously towards the Persian capital. The great cities of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis all surrendered without a fight. Persepolis, the ancestral seat of the Achaemenid Empire, was burned to the ground as a retaliation for the destruction of Athens 150 years ago. Alexander now continued to chase Darius, who fled further east towards Bactria. There he was betrayed and killed by one of his own satraps, Bessus. Alexander now acted as a legitimate successor to the Achaemenids, and in time most Persian nobles accepted him as their new king. He also adopted Persian court customs, but this wasn't popular with his Greek and Macedonian troops. The men were already exhausted from the long years of campaigns, but Alexander forced them to march even further east into Bactria and Sogdiana. There he spent 3 years trying to quell local rebellions and establish Macedonian rule. This even further expanded the rift between Alexander and his men. A number of high-ranking officers had to be executed for alleged conspiracies. Alexander replaced part of his army with fresh Iranian troops. His inner circle was gradually replaced by new generals such as Perdiccas, Craterus, Lysimachus, and Ptolemy. These men would soon have important roles to play. With this new army, Alexander continued his eastward march, eventually reaching the Indus Valley in 327. There he met fierce resistance, but nonetheless continued on. He reached the Hydaspes River, where a large army was blocking his path. In the last pitched battle of his life, Alexander was again successful. The way was now open for Alexander to enter the Indian subcontinent, but his troops finally had enough. Far from home, utterly exhausted, and with no clear goal in sight, the Macedonian army rebelled. Alexander had no other choice but to return home. He marched down the Indus Valley and then across the arid wasteland of Gudrosia. Countless lives were lost during this march, but eventually in 324 BCE they reached Susa. Alexander now took to uniting his Macedonian and Persian subjects. In a grand ceremony, Alexander, 90 of his officers, and 10,000 of his troops all married Persian wives. Macedonian veterans, along with 20,000 Greek mercenaries from across the empire, were sent back home. These returning troops would cause great unrest across Greece for years to come. In the spring of 323, Alexander arrived in Babylon. He spent months planning his next campaign into Arabia, when suddenly, after a day of heavy drinking, Alexander developed a fever. For the next 2 weeks, he was bedridden and his condition was deteriorating. Finally, on the 10th of June, Alexander passed away. He was only 32 at the time. Theories on his death vary widely, from diseases and old battle wounds to poisonings. In his short, 13-year reign, Alexander did what the whole Greek world thought impossible. He conquered the mighty Achaemenids, forging one of the largest empires in history in the process. Alexander was undefeated in battle and is widely considered the greatest military commander of all time. Alexander's death marks the end of the classical and start of the Hellenistic period. Following his death, a frantic struggle for power erupted between his generals. These generals were known as Diadochi, meaning successors. Alexander's infant son, Alexander IV, and his mentally impaired half-brother, Philip III, were crowned joint rulers. In actuality, however, they were merely figureheads while the Diadochi assumed control of the empire. Perdiccas, one of Alexander's most trusted advisors, acted as regent for the two kings. Other notable generals were assigned strong satrapies of the empire. Macedonia and Greece were assigned to Antipater, Thrace to Lysimachus, Western Asia Minor to Antigonus the One-Eyed, Egypt to Ptolemy I, and other parts to lesser-known Macedonian generals. The returning Greek veterans now caused unrest in Greece. In a last-ditch attempt, the Greeks led by Athens rebelled against Macedonian rule, but they were defeated by Antipater. The Corinthian League was dissolved, and the age of independent city-states was brought to an end. When Perdiccas tried to marry Alexander's sister in 322 BCE, Antipater, Antigonus, and Ptolemy formed a coalition against him. Ptolemy stole Alexander's body, and Perdiccas marched his troops on Egypt, starting the First War of the Diadochi. During a failed attempt to cross the Nile, Perdiccas lost a large part of his force and he was assassinated by some of his generals. Antipater was now assigned as the new regent of the empire, and one of the assassins, Seleucus, became satrap of Babylon. Antigonus was named the strategos of Asia and he was given control of the royal forces. The death of Antipater in 319 BCE sparked the outbreak of the Second War of the Diadochi. He named Polyperchon as his successor to the regency, but his son Cassander refused to accept this appointment. He allied with Antigonus, Ptolemy, and Lysimachus, and together they deposed Polyperchon. Cassander was now the new ruler of Macedon, while Antigonus controlled most of Asia. During the war, Philip III was killed, and Alexander IV was imprisoned by Cassander. The other Diadochi now united against Antigonus and his rising power. He was defeated in 311, and Seleucus gained control of the eastern satrapies. Alexander was now killed by Cassander, but his death was kept a mystery. Following a short peace, the hostilities resumed in 307. Antigonus sent his son Demetrius to Greece, where he liberated Athens from Cassander. He then sailed to Cyprus, taking it away from Ptolemy. The victorious troops now hailed Antigonus and Demetrius as kings. The other rulers soon followed, and 5 separate kingdoms were established. Ironically, the first proclaimed kingdom was also the first to fall. The coalition of Cassander, Lysimachus, and Seleucus defeated the Antigonid forces in 301 BCE. Antigonus was killed, but Demetrius fled to Greece. Their territory was divided between the victors. While they were fighting in the north, Ptolemy invaded Judea and Phoenicia. He allied himself with Lysimachus to protect his new holdings. In answer, Seleucus allied with Demetrius, who was controlling a strong fleet in the Aegean. When Cassander died in 297, his sons fought over succession. Demetrius seized this opportunity and captured Macedonia in 294 BCE. Soon after, Lysimachus and Pyrrhus of Epirus launched a joint campaign on Macedonia. Instead of fighting a losing battle, Demetrius left Macedonia and invaded Anatolia with his army. He was eventually captured by Seleucus and he died in captivity. A succession crisis in Thrace prompted Seleucus to attack Lysimachus in 281. The two old kings, both over 80 at this point, met in a decisive battle in Anatolia. In the end, Lysimachus lay dead in the field, and the wars of the Diadochi were at an end. Seleucus now only had to reach out and take the throne of Macedonia for himself. A generation-long dream of uniting Alexander's old empire was finally within his grasp. But before he could do that, he was assassinated by one of Ptolemy's sons, who crowned himself king of Macedonia. His reign, however, was cut short by a Gallic invasion in 279, and he was slain in battle. Macedonia was now left in a complete state of anarchy, with a roaming band of Gauls making things even more difficult. An alliance of Greek cities known as the Aetolian League and Antigonus Gonatas, son of Demetrius, managed to finally expel the Gauls. With this victory, the Aetolian League secured its independence, and Antigonus captured the throne of Macedonia. The struggle for Alexander's succession was now over, and 3 kingdoms emerged as the predominant powers of the Hellenistic world. By far the largest of the 3, the Seleucid Empire, would also prove the most vulnerable. A series of conflicts with the Ptolemies, known as the Syrian Wars, severely weakened the Seleucid hold over parts of the empire. Much of Anatolia was lost to the kings of Pergamon, Bithynia, Cappadocia, and Pontus. Eastern provinces of Bactria and Parthia carved out kingdoms of their own. Although Ptolemaic Egypt was more secure, by the end of the 3rd century it too experienced a significant decline, losing control of Upper Egypt. For all these centuries, the Greek world always looked to the east, choosing to mostly ignore the barbarians in the west. It must have been a real surprise then that their end would come from the west. By the start of the 2nd century BC, the Romans had defeated Carthage and secured their place as the chief power of the western Mediterranean. Ever in search of new conquests, the Romans now looked to the east. They first came as defenders of the Greeks, but soon enough they started conquering. The Macedonians fell first in 168 BCE, and the rest of mainland Greece followed during the Achaean War in 146. The city of Corinth was completely destroyed, and a large influx of Greeks into the Roman world served as a catalyst for the development of the joint Greco-Roman culture. The Romans expanded into Anatolia when the last king of Pergamon, Attalus III, named the republic as his successor in 133 BCE. At the start of the 1st century BCE, the Romans fought a series of wars against Mithridates VI, the king of Pontus. He was finally defeated in 63 BCE by the Roman general Pompey Magnus. By that time, the once great Seleucid Empire was reduced to only a shadow of its former self. Constant wars of succession and growing pressure from the expanding Parthian Empire pushed the Seleucids all the way to Syria. During the last Mithridatic War, Pompey subjugated all the territory from the Black Sea to Egypt. Syria was incorporated as Roman province, ending the Seleucid dynasty, while other territories were set up as client states. Ptolemaic Egypt was now the only remaining independent Hellenistic kingdom. But it wasn't long before Ptolemy II succumbed to the Romans. During the last war of the Roman Republic, Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, allied with Mark Antony. They were defeated by Octavian in 30 BCE, and the last of the Hellenic kingdoms came to an end. Cleopatra's death marks the end of the Hellenistic period and the start of Roman Greece. Octavian went on to crown himself the first Roman emperor, taking the name Augustus. Roman arrival onto the eastern Mediterranean was dramatic and unexpected. The Greek world enjoyed independence since the Bronze Age. Through colonization, the Greeks spread across the Mediterranean. Alexander's conquests expanded Greek influence all the way to India, changing the Near East in the process. His successors founded long-lasting dynasties that would continue the Greek hegemony over the region. This new world created by Alexander was suddenly overthrown by the Romans in less than a century. Although Greece was now conquered, this was not the end of Greek culture nor its legacy. In 330 CE, an old Greek colony, Byzantium, became a new capital of the Roman Empire, taking the name Constantinople. When the empire split in two, Constantinople remained the capital of the eastern part. As time went on, Greek slowly replaced Latin as the official language of the Eastern Roman Empire, commonly known as the Byzantine Empire. In 1453, almost 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire, Constantinople would fall to the Ottomans, finally marking the end of the Greco-Roman world.